since the death of Nelson Mandela, it's fair to call Cyril Ramaphosa one of the few surviving founding fathers of post-apartheid South Africa. He helped to write the country's new constitution, which would supposedly usher in a new era of prosperity and equality. He also oversaw the transition to the new government. And as South Africa descended into lawlessness and squalor over the ensuing 30 years, Ramaphosa gradually accumulated more wealth and power until he finally became the country's president in 2018. He's currently worth something like $500 million, even as the vast majority of South Africans now live in extreme poverty. What this means is that Ramaphosa is the personification of South Africa's post-colonial experiment. When he drafted the new constitution, he presumably did not foresee that by 2025, the country would have the single highest unemployment rate of any country in the world at 40%. He certainly didn't tell anyone that he eventually planned to sign new laws that would disenfranchise and rob white farmers, or that white people would be systematically slaughtered in their homes. But all that has happened. And yet, for all this time, no one, and certainly no world leader, has held this deranged despot accountable for any of that. Instead, it's been something of a tradition in Washington to pretend that South Africa is somehow a great ally to the United States and to treat Ramaphosa as royalty, as Joe Biden did a few years ago. But that tradition came to a very abrupt end yesterday in the Oval Office when Donald Trump did something that no other political figure has ever done. He told Ramaphosa to his face in the most public forum imaginable that he's a fraud who is overseeing a white genocide. And in the process, Trump took a blowtorch to a mythology that pretty much every politician from both parties has been desperate to uphold for several decades. Now, in order to understand the importance of what Donald Trump communicated here, you have to first see exactly how he communicated it. Now, first, of course, Ramaphosa asked the United States for money, because any visiting dignitary now, that's what they do. They come hat in hand as beggars asking for our money. And in this case, he's done that because he's run his country into the ground and they can't even feed themselves anymore. Then a reporter asked a patronizing question about what it would take for Trump to stop repeating supposedly false claims about white genocide in South Africa. In other words, the reporter's basically calling Trump a liar and asking him what it would take for him to stop lying. And here's how that went.
Our main real reason for being here is to foster trade and investment so that we are able to grow our economy with your support, and so that we are also able to address all these societal problems, because criminality thrives when people are unemployed, when they have no other hope to eke out a living. So that is what we need to resolve.
President, this time, what will it take for you to be convinced that there's no white genocide in South Africa?
Well, I can answer that for the President. It's for him. No, seriously.
I'd rather have him answer.
Yeah, I'd rather answer that. It will be.
Our President will respond to you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. President.
It will take President Trump listening to the voices of South Africans, some of whom are his good friends.
So, after begging for cash, Ramaphosa validates what the reporter is saying, is being patronizing to the President of the United States, to our president. He says Donald Trump needs to listen to the people of South Africa in order to stop lying about the alleged genocide of white people. It's probably the most obnoxious answer that he could have come up with, especially after dozens of South Africans just fled the country in fear of their lives. But Trump was prepared for it. First of all, Trump asked one of the white golfers that Ramaphosa brought with him, this is a two-time U.S. Open winner named Retief Goosen, what the situation was like in South Africa. And the golfer responded that his father's friends who own farms have been murdered and the farms are constantly being torched. Watch.
I grew up in an area in South Africa that is a farmland area, Polokwane.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there is some issues up there, obviously. My dad was a property developer as well as a part-time farmer. And yeah, some of these buddy farmers got killed. The farm is still going, my brothers run it, but it's a constant battle with farms they're trying to burn the farms down to chase you away. So it is a concern to try and make a living as a farmer, and at the end they, without farmers, there's no food on the plate. So we need the farmers to produce the food.
Farming, right? He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't even want to do what you're doing, right? They love farming. They don't want to leave. But it's a struggle.
Yeah, and food and fresh water is the most important thing in life. Without those two things, you can't survive.
How is the water there?
The water is great. Obviously, all the water comes out of the borehole, out of ground for us down there. But yeah, it is a battle to get the water out sometimes when all the equipment gets stolen all the time that you're trying to get the
So
water
does
out.
your family and your brother, do they feel safe on the farm?
They live behind electric fences, try and be at night safe. But it is constant whenever you leave that something could happen. And
There's nowhere to live.
both of them has been attacked in their houses. My mom's been attacked in her house when she was 80. So it is difficult.
So this is a pretty extraordinary moment because keep in mind, this is one of the golfers that the president of South Africa brought to the Oval Office as part of the South Africa's, delegation, hoping he'd neutralize the supposedly fake narrative, quote unquote, about white genocide. This is one of the people that the president of South Africa demanded obnoxiously that Trump listen to. He said, all you have to do is listen to these people. And then it's this is essentially a witness for the defense, basically. And this is what he says. So it didn't exactly go as planned, which probably tells you something about the level of planning that South Africa's government is capable of. And things only got worse from there as Trump dimmed the lights in the Oval Office and played a tape of South African politicians openly calling for the murders of white farmers. In other words, Trump once again called Ramaphosa's bluff. He listened to the calls for genocide coming from South Africans, and he made Ramaphosa and the rest of the world listen to it as well. And as you watch this, notice the expression on the South African president's face as he genuinely cannot believe what's happening. Watch.
It has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see the articles, please, if you would. And turn the lights down. Turn the lights down, and just put this on. It's right behind you, Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. South Africa,
a revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act. Shoot to kill the mother, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer. Pa, 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 pa.
Oh, look, these are articles over the last few days. Death of people. Death. Horrible death. Death. I don't know. To pick anyone. White South Africans are fleeing because of the violence and racist laws. And this is all, I'll give these to you. So when you say, what would I like to do? I don't know what to do. Look at this. White South African couples say that they were attacked violently.
President Trump, when will you go and see for yourself if it is indeed true?
Well, I could do that. Look, here's burial sites all over the place. These are all white farmers that are being buried.
So just, it's an incredible moment. Again, remember the South African president, what queued this up perfectly. And you could not have scripted it any better. Where the South African president said, "Well, what Trump needs to do is just listen." And so then Trump says, "Okay, we'll listen. Yeah, let's do that. Hey, what do you think? Let's all listen. Let's all just listen for a moment." Being a husband, father, and host of my own show means life never slows down. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and vegetables every day. Sounds miserable and pretty time-consuming. But with Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and vegetables every day with 31 different whole fruit and vegetable ingredients. Balance of Nature takes fruits and vegetables, freeze-dries them, turns them into a powder, and then puts them into a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsule every day, and then your body knows what to do with them. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Walsh for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, Get a free bottle of Fiber and Spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Walsh. Try to imagine that you run South Africa. You're in charge of the African National Congress, not exactly an enviable position. Your country has the highest unemployment rate in the entire world since the end of apartheid, which was supposedly the greatest evil to ever befall mankind. A lot of bad things have been happening. The power grid has collapsed along with the export markets and any semblance of public safety. Headlines like this one are common. As you can see, it reads, grandmother 71 dies of shock after she was forced to watch her 3 granddaughters being raped at gunpoint at her home in South Africa. And there's plenty more where that came from because you have turned your country into the living embodiment of DEI to disastrous results. And then, to your horror, the President of the United States decides to shine an international spotlight on your incompetence. He makes it impossible to hide what's going on in South Africa. Specifically, the President allows white citizens of South Africa to flee to the U.S., so they can escape all the anti-white violence and race-based land seizures that you've implemented in your failing country. And unsurprisingly, a lot of white people take the United States up on the offer. They decide that it's better to uproot their entire families and fly halfway across the world than to spend another second under your rule in South Africa. Now, if you have an ounce of shame, that would have to be extremely monumentally embarrassing. I mean, there are politicians in Japan who would quite literally commit like ritualistic suicide under those circumstances. The job of any government is to look after the well-being of its own people. And once the most productive members of society start leaving at great personal cost to themselves, then you have failed as a leader and as a government. You are illegitimate and you have no one else to blame. And you should resign in shame at the absolute minimum. But the African National Congress has decided on the opposite course of action. Rather than engage in any kind of introspection, they decided to attack the white refugees who have just fled to America. They're not showing any interest in keeping any of the remaining Afrikaners from fleeing, even though they're responsible for maintaining the vast majority of usable farmland in the country. They're also not interested in contesting the notion that white people are going to be persecuted in their country. Instead, the African National Congress released this statement the other day. As you can see, the statement reads, quote, they flee not from persecution, but from justice, equality, and accountability for historic privilege. The statement goes on to describe the refugees as cowardly and says that they are offended by a democratic society working to redress past injustices. Then there's this concluding line, which really sells the message. Quote, ours is not a broken or failing state. It's a people's democracy advancing against the tides of distortion and destructive, divisive narratives, close quote. Well, this is one of those, those things that's less true for having been said, as the saying goes. If you're running a highly functional, stable country, then you're not going to end your press release out of nowhere by declaring that you're not a broken or failing state. No state that isn't a failing state has ever had to clarify in a statement that they aren't a failing state. And it's like walking up to your wife unprompted and announcing that you're not having an affair. But none of these people are especially bright, so they're not aware of the implications of what they're saying, no matter how obvious those implications might be. That also explains why, in effect, their message is essentially an explicit threat to every white person in South Africa. And they're also attempting to coax the refugees back with a promise of giving them the opportunity to be held accountable for historical injustices. They're basically saying, hey guys, can you come back so we can persecute you? This isn't fair. We were going to persecute you and then you left. That's not fair. Now, with this statement, they are validating everything the Trump administration says about the country. No person of any race should be subjected to land seizures or violence as part of accountability for historic privilege, whatever the heck that means. But that's what the government of South Africa is now demanding by their own admission. And it's what the political left is demanding in this country, too. In the days since the first 59 white refugees arrived from South Africa, political commentators on the left have been melting down to a degree that's truly hard to comprehend, even given everything we already know about these people. What we're seeing is primal rage and hysteria. I mean, it's a level of anti-white race hatred that needs to be exposed, or else very soon, we're going to start to look a lot like South Africa. So let's start with Don Lemon, who no longer has the need to temper his passion for white genocide now that he's not on cable news. Not that cable news personalities are tempering it very much, as we'll see later on. But anyway, here's Don Lemon.
This South African farmer, which is the most blatantly obvious racist ever. It is blatantly obvious the way that we treat white South Africans, who, by the way, for the most part, and I am generalizing here, some of the wealthiest people are well-to-do people in the country. They speak their language. They're not just taking land away from white South African farmers. White South Africans, about 9% of the population, owned 87% of the fertile land. Okay? Today, Black South Africans make up more than 90% of the population, and they only hold about 4% of all privately owned land. So what they're trying to do is say, hey, we need to fix an historical injustice and figure out if you're not using that land to farm, then we need to have some of that land, not taking all of your entire farm. That's not what's happening. And we need to what? There needs to be equity. And now people are crying because the playing field is being leveled. And so therefore it is now discrimination.
Okay, so notice what is being said here. Notice he says that white people own most of the fertile land in South Africa. The word fertile is doing a lot of work there because if you know anything about farmland, even if you don't know anything about it, you should still know that it's possible to ruin it. I mean, it's possible to do a very bad job of maintaining it. And it's not as though you could just give a farm to a random person off the street and rest assured that it's going to be fertile in 10 years. And we know that for a few reasons. First of all, it's common sense. Second, Zimbabwe already tried this. Several decades ago, they made the decision to seize farms from whites, give them to black citizens. After all, what could go wrong? Well, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa, supposedly. Well, as it turns out, a lot can go wrong. Like a whole lot. And before long, Zimbabwe needed to import food because they couldn't make their own. And eventually the government gave up on the idea. They gave the farmland back to the white people. This is a Bloomberg News article from a few years ago. Quote, Zimbabwe gives land back to white farmers after wrecking economy. 2 decades after President Robert Mugabe wrecked Zimbabwe's economy by urging black subsistence farmers to violently force white commercial farmers and their workers off the land, his successor has thrown in the towel. The seizures that began in 2000 were ratified by the government, which said they were needed to redress colonial imbalances. A vibrant agricultural industry that exported tobacco and roses and grew most of the food the nation needed collapsed. Periodic food shortages ensued, inflation became the world's highest, and the manufacturing industry was decimated. What was one of Africa's richest countries became one of its poorest, close quote. Okay, so in other words, it turns out that when you use the government to redistribute fertile farmland to correct some alleged injustice, what you get is famine. Okay, that's what equity means in practice. It's what always happens when you take land from people who are managing it properly and redistribute it on the basis of race. Competence matters, especially when you're talking about a country's food supply. And make no mistake, the reason those white people control the farmland in South Africa is because historically they're competent. They bought it. They maintained it for generations. Nobody handed it to them or maintained it for them. The fact that it's still fertile, again, you can ruin farmland. It's still fertile, even by Don Lemon's own testimony. It's still fertile after generations. What does that mean? It means that they are properly managing the land. And in many cases, they were there long before black South Africans arrived and demanded their property. Now, in this debate, we are well past the point where the left can scream apartheid and just get whatever they want. Post-apartheid South Africa is simply too great of a disaster by every available metric. And by the way, apartheid was nothing like what's currently being enacted in South Africa. As we discussed the other day, there were far fewer race-based laws under apartheid than there are right now in South Africa. And the race-based laws under apartheid, by and large, were directed at enforcing racial separation, not large-scale farm seizures by the government without any limiting principle whatsoever.